Okay, here we go. We are now, after what, a year and a half or over 2 years or whatever it is, we're now in the very last section. And the whole purpose is, this is called the feast template. This is like page 283 or something. Yeah, 281 of my notes. So we have gone through quite a bit. And this is all to build up to one thing. I've shown you that the feasts are prophetic. Now let's try it. Let's put in the feast template. That's what I call it. And see how things line up for the tribulation and see if we could understand some things. All right, so timing of the return. So if we look at, and let's just draw and there's 1260 days. This is the tribulation period, right? 1260 days, and then right here with a 10-day gap, really a 7 if you count it another way, but and right here is what? The rapture, right? We're going to, like I say, really break this down, and then his return is on what day? Day of atonement. All right, which actually is a funny thing if you really notice this, is the first 6 years of the tribulation period are not exact Shemitahs. Why? Because it starts on Day of Atonement. The very start of Day of Atonement, okay, is the beginning of the tribulation period, right? Which means the very start of the Day of Atonement 7 years later is the very end of the tribulation period, which means the first 6 Shemitahs in there start on what? Rosh Hashanah, our Feast of Trumpets. And they go to Rosh Hashanah, or Feast of Trumpets. So they're actually a little bit offset. But that last Shemitah, 7th Shemitah down here, okay, of the last 7 years, is an exact Shemitah. I know that might sound kind of confusing, but that's the timing of it, because in Leviticus 25, 8 through 10, it tells us that on the Jubilee year, it starts not on the Feast of Trumpets, but on the Day of Atonement. And there's a reason why, because the Day of Atonement represents what? Day of Atonement represents what? Prophetically. It's like Feast of Trumpets represents the rapture. Day of Atonement represents what? Tribulation period. Okay? Because at the very, what ends the 7-year tribulation? What ends that period of time? Yes, which is the year of Jubilee. Okay, so it all lines up. Now, we see Matthew 24:31 that he returns to the sound of a great trumpet. Now, that's in the Greek, so it doesn't say shofar. It just has the word for trumpet. But it's the shofar. That is hailing in, according to Leviticus 25, the year of Jubilee. And like I said before, according to Mark Biltz, the first trumpet is the Pentecost trumpet. The last trumpet is the Feast of Trumpets. And the great trumpet is the trumpet on atonement. Think about that. The first trumpet is the Pentecost trumpet. That's the first trumpet for the church. That begins it, right? What's the last trumpet for the church? Feast of Trumpets. That ends it. First trumpet, Pentecost. Last trumpet is Feast of Trumpets. Get it? First trumpet, last trumpet. And the great trumpet is the Day of Atonement. Okay? So in Joel 2:15, he says, blow the trumpet or the shofar in Zion. Sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly. What's that referring to? The Day of Atonement. What's the Day of Atonement known as to the Jews? And it calls this in the book of Acts, the fast, because you afflict your souls. So right there, he's saying, blow trumpet where? In Zion. Isn't that ironic? Because doesn't Romans 11:25 and 26 say this? For I would not have you ignorant of this mystery, brethren, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentile comes in, right? Now, where does the Savior come from? Zion. Where's the trumpet blown? Zion. He says this, so all Israel shall be saved, just as is written, they shall come out of Zion, the deliverer, and shall turn all ungodliness away from Jacob. He's talking about the Day of Atonement trumpet, the Jubilee year trumpet that's going to be blown in Zion when Jesus comes and rescues the Jews. Okay, so right here is where he returns, which is Day of Atonement, right? Yeah, that I just erased. I'm trying to get this straight. Now, that happens on what day, what month? 7th month, 10th day. No. We're going to go to the Jewish time. 7th month, right? 10th day. Now, what festival's next? Now, that's his return. The 10th day. Okay, yes. Right here is tabernacles. Now, let me ask you this. What does that represent?
No, that represents the millennial kingdom.
Yes. So there's a 5-day gap here, right? He returns, but then everybody thinks, well, that's the millennial kingdom. That's not the millennial kingdom. There's a 5-day gap from the 10th to the 15th. Why would there be a 5-day gap? Yes. Is in Matthew 25, it says this, okay? 25, 31, and 32. And when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he shall sit upon the throne of his glory. That's obviously the second return, right? Yes. That is not the rapture. And before him he shall gather all the nations. That's all the nations that are left in the tribulation period. And he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth the sheep from the goats. So the sheep on his right hand, the goats on his left. All right? And there's a great judgment that takes place. So right here in this little 5-day gap is Matthew 25, the sheep and goat judgment. Why? Because is the millennial kingdom for the goats? No. No, it's not. Okay? It's for the sheep. So he's got to judge and eliminate the goats. And that sounds kind of harsh. Because it's like, okay, into the everlasting fire for you. But you know what? I think that we're going to have a fuller understanding. It says in Romans, 1 Corinthians 13, that when we're face to face with God, we shall fully know all things just as we have been fully known. So when we see the judgment, we're not going to do that. Oh, poor them. Oh, that's not fair. We're going to be rejoicing. So they obviously have had chance after chance, and they rejected it. In fact, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says, they're given over to believe the lie because they rejected the truth. See, it's only after you reject the truth that you're given over to deception and lie. He comes back. This is the Feast of Trumpets, right? Or, excuse me, Tabernacles right here. There's something that happens here. You know how long Tabernacles is celebrated? 7 days. How long is a wedding feast? 7 days. Here's my premise. I've never seen anyone come up with this, so it's probably wrong. But listen to this. Someone go to Revelation 19, 7 through 9. Okay, because we think the marriage takes place up in heaven, right? And it might. But I think he has a real marriage down here on this earth. And just read 19, 7 through 9. Okay, so it says, his wife has made herself ready. Actually, the word there is gune. And it could be wife, it could be woman, and it could be bride. It could be any of those. So apparently, in my translation says, his bride has made herself ready. But look it up. The word is gune. It's just like in Bulgaria, their wife they call žena, which means woman. This is my woman. This is my žena. Okay, kind of like we might say it here. Okay, so what I'm saying is that marriage feast for the marriage between Christ and the church might occur right here in this 7-day period. After 5 days, after he gets the sheep out or the goats out, and the millennial kingdom begins, There's a 7-day period where there's that Feast of Trumpet, which coincides with the 7-day marriage feast. Isn't that coincidental? And if you read that version, certain version, it says his wife has made herself ready. Parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. Okay? It talks about, people think, well, that's the when he comes for the bride, right? No, there's no bride in there. The bride's already gone. He's coming to get the 10 virgins for the wedding feast, not for the wedding ceremony. Okay? You have to really kind of cut that up, because it says this, 25:10. And when they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and when they were ready, went in with him to the marriage, to the gamos, and the door was shut. So when the 5 virgins that weren't ready went out to buy, then the 5 virgins that were went with the bridegroom to the gamos. That could be not the wedding ceremony, but the feast afterwards. Okay? So it's kind of, I'm not explaining that very well, but there's just different ways you could put it together, and it fits into the feast template perfectly. Now, listen to Daniel 12:11. Okay? Daniel 12:11. Now, we're going to put all these days together. It says this in 12:11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice will be taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there will be 1,290 days. For the abomination of desolation, and it doesn't tell you until what. I read it in context. He just kind of jumps to that passage. That's why that book was sealed. So if you're talking about 1,290 days, and you start right here, right, from the abomination of desolation, and you take away 1,260 days, what's that? Okay, so from the time of his return until right here, there's a 30-day gap. Okay, 30-day. So what possibly happens 30 days past his return?
No idea.
First 5 days is the judgment of the goats. The next 25, after the 7-day wedding feast, is the giving out of rewards. Okay? Because when you read parable after parable, when the goodman of the house returns, what happens? Or, the master of the house returns, he punishes the evil and he rewards the good, right? There's 2 things that happen. Punishment of the evil, rewarding the good. That's not the rapture passage, which everybody interprets that as, because the rapture is not in the Gospels. Because does punishment happen at the rapture? No. It's got to be the second return. Like Luke 19:11 through 27, you will see that the rewards that the good servants get are cities. Almost like they're rulers over them. Get it? The millennial kingdom, an earthly kingdom, the rewards is cities. You rule over this city and that city. That's what the good servants get, because they're good stewards. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, so we're all up. So we see 5 days past the judgment of the sheep and goats. The next 7 days is what? The marriage ceremony. And then if you go 30 days past his return, that leaves you the rest of the time to hand out the rewards. Is this all making sense? The millennial kingdom is a time of testing. This is a quick little remnant. I won't get too deep into it. But 30 days past his return, at this point, actually happens to be an interesting date. It's the 10th of Heshvan, which is the day it started to rain for the flood. If you go to Genesis. So right here, when you get 30 days past his return and he's done all that stuff, it's the same day it started to rain for the flood. Now, millennial kingdom and the flood, they don't match up, do they? Well, it rained for 40 days. That's a time of testing and trial. Because I think there's a typology there. Here's the typology. The millennial kingdom is a time of testing and trial. How? Anyone know? Because the devil's let loose at the end of the millennial kingdom. He gathers all the nations and they come against Christ. In other words, it's a real test of the heart. You lived in the perfect environment. You lived under the most perfect, righteous, merciful ruler ever. And then you rebel. It's a time of testing, just like the flood. Okay? Oh, and something else I forgot to tell you. This 5-day period right here, you know, 2 tabernacles. According to Bullinger, 5 is the gematria of the tabernacle. And it leads right to the Feast of Tabernacles. And I'm not even going to get into why he says that. And he doesn't even know about the feast template. He lived over 100 years ago. But he wrote, you know, one of the books on gematria. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. Okay. Now, we're going to go to one other thing. Daniel, the very next verse, 12:12. Blessed is he that waiteth and comes to the 1,335 days. Now we're really getting weird. Because now we're going to go 75 days past his return. So this is now Daniel 12:12. And that's 1,335 days. You take away the 1,260s from the abomination of desolation. That's 75 days past his return. Now, who's sharp enough to tell me, why are you blessed if you get 75 days past his return? Very simply. And I'm not going to tell you how I come up with the calculation because I would really confuse you. 75 days past his return. Okay, so that's 2 months. So this occurs in the 7th. That's the 9th month. 25th day. Yes. It lands on Hanukkah. What was Hanukkah about? It was where Antiochus Epiphanes went in there, get this, and did the abomination of desolation. In fact, according to one of my commentaries, from the abomination of desolation until Antiochus Epiphanes died was exactly 1,335 days. That's how it was fulfilled then. But now it represents the abomination of desolation that happened. And then when they cleansed the temple, they had the cruse of oil for 1 day. And they said, let's just go for it. They needed 8 days worth of oil. And guess how long it burned? 8 days. The cleansing of the temple from the abomination of desolation. What does this represent? The cleansing of the temple from the abomination of desolation. Same thing. Antiochus, the type of Antichrist, does the abomination of desolation, and they cleanse the temple on Hanukkah. And now on Hanukkah, that's when the temple is going to be recleansed. Now we understand it, and people get to that verse and they said, we don't understand this. Again, using the feast template, it should all line up. What day does the abomination of desolation happen on? Oh. No. This is within the 7 years. Well, if it starts on the 7th month, okay, 10th day, we can figure out when you get here, okay? This is when the abomination of desolation, and it happens on a close, not quite. In fact, I'm going to go over what happens on Passover right after this. Okay? So, right here, we have, huh? No, I'm fine. Okay, so, okay. Sorry, guys. All right, so we have the abomination of desolation, which right here we know the exact date. It goes to the 1st month, 10th day. When you add all the days up, very simple, because we're back to a 1260-day year, right? So if we go there, we're going to see this is called what the Jews called the Shabbat Haggadah, the Great Sabbath. What happens on there? The Sabbath before the Passover, they choose the Passover lamb. What day did Jesus ride into Jerusalem? This is the day that the Lord has made. Psalms, I think, 118 or 119. Also, Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice so greatly, daughter of Zion. Your king comes to you, right? Jesus presented himself as the king exactly on the date of what we would call mid-trib or the abomination of desolation. So what happens in the tribulation period? The Antichrist presents himself as the king. Yet see the typology and the mirroring of what Jesus did? And he does so on Shabbat Haggadah, on the Sabbath before the tribulation period. Is Jesus came and presented himself as king on that day. It just so happens exactly what the Antichrist does is on that very same day, he presents himself as God, as king, by going into the very temple of God and saying, I am God. Okay? So do you see all this parallelism and all these coincidences that are happening? When you put in the feast template on both, and this applies to both the Christ and the Antichrist. You know what the synagogue reading for that day is? It is Malachi chapter 3, verses 4 through 24. Oh, but Malachi 3 doesn't have 24 verses. That's the Jewish Bible. Okay? So it's actually, you have to translate that into English. But here's their verse that they use. Ready? The Lord whom you seek shall come suddenly into his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom you delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. That's Malachi 3:1. That's their synagogue reading. Isn't that funny? That it talks about the Lord coming suddenly into his temple. So when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, what did he do? He went to the temple. And on that very same day, Jesus, or the Antichrist, will go into the temple of God. And okay, better not. Scott's not here, so I'm saying it couldn't be his. So okay, so in the very synagogue reading that talks about Jesus going into the temple is the very same synagogue reading for that day in which the Antichrist will go into the temple and proclaim himself as being God. Now, according to Jewish tradition, okay, it's the day that the conquest of the promised land began, all right? And that's exactly the day the Jews are kicked out of the land and the Antichrist takes it over. See the typology there? God gives them the land. That's the day that they're kicked out of the land by the Antichrist. Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, you who are in Judea, flee to the mountains. That's when they go to Petra. They're kicked out of the land the same day that God gives them the land. All these typologies, and they just totally blow me away. How long is the ministry of the two witnesses? 1,260 days. So we got to decide which one does it go into, the first half or the second half? Okay, it's pretty, to me, logical that it has to be the first half. Because why? Their bodies lay in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days, right? Revelation 11. Can you imagine after Jesus comes back, he lets their bodies lie in the streets and the world celebrates for 3.5 days? That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to put them in there in the first half. Okay, that's the only thing for a variety of reasons that that makes sense. Now let me read you this passage. Okay, 6, 7. It says this in Revelation 11:7-12. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and he shall overcome them. Now, when does the beast able to overcome them? When he ascendeth out of the bottomless pit. What's the beast doing there? Oh, this is the first half.
Oh, the first half.
He ascends right here because there's an assassination attempt on his life. And he actually dies. Okay? It's only at mid-trib when he's able to overcome, after 1,260 days, the two witnesses, and go into the temple saying he's God. It all happens on that one day. That's why you got to watch out for the exact middle part. It says, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified, which is where? Jerusalem. That's where they are. They're in front of the temple. And they, the people and kindred and tongues and nations, shall see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and shall not suffer their bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell on the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and send gifts to one another, and call it Christmas number 2. Because the two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from God shall enter into them, and they stood on their feet. And great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up hither. And they ascended to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. Now, some people say, well, see, that's the tribulation period. I mean, that's the rapture. No, you could only spiritualize it. I'm sorry?
So they've had the opportunity to ascend twice to heaven.
Yes, exactly. So we see it has to be the first half. Okay? Now, what's the third seal in Revelation? I believe it's 6. And he opened the third seal, and I heard a living creature say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and him who sat upon it had a pair of scales in his hands. And I heard the voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, that's a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley, which is a lesser grain, for a denarius, a day's wages, and do not harm the oil and the wine. That's the rich people. Okay, so why is there famine? It's because in this first half, Elijah calls for no rain. And when he called for no rain in Kings, how long did it last? 3.5 years. I think he's going to call for it the same amount of time, and on the whole earth, there's going to be no rainfall. What does that cause? Famine.
Financial crash.
Everything. And that's why you got to have the mark of the beast come in right there. And that's, see how it all lines up? 3.5 years. And we only know that. It doesn't tell you in the Old Testament how long he called for famine or for a drought. It's only in Luke and the book of James that gives us that information later on. That tells us it's 3.5 years. Okay? So there's famine as a result. And if that's exactly 3.5 years, which I think it's going to be, then we are going to see a horrific famine take place. Okay, I think I'm about there. And then the Antichrist will overcome them at mid-trib. I'll just finish with this. The Antichrist, he overcomes them because in Revelation 11:7, and when they have finished with the testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome and kill them because of the assassination attempt, remember? Yes. And listen to Revelation 13:3-5. And I saw one of his heads, that's the beast that comes out of the sea in Revelation 13. Oh, he has 7 heads. Guess what the ancients believed about the Leviathan? That he had 7 heads. I was kind of startled.
The Leviathan is a dragon?
Yes, it's that creature in the book of Job and other places that shows up. That's a typology of Satan, of evil, of the greatest creature probably that God has made as far as here on this earth. And when I read that, because I was always telling my kids, I think Revelation 13:1, that beast is Leviathan. Then I read the ancients believe he had 7 heads. Like, oh, that's interesting. And I saw one of its heads as if it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and the whole earth went after the beast and wondered. Okay? And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with them? And there was given to him a mouth speaking great things and and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue or to act for 42 months. So at the point that he ascends out of the bottomless pit, he gets to go on for how long? 42 months, which is exactly, guess what? 1,260 days. So it's right here that he ascends out of the pit. He's given power to kill the 2 witnesses. And the Jews flee out. And you have all that stuff going on. And it's just all hell breaks loose at this point.